take or actually go right into the session one. And if I'm correct, Glenn is first. Yeah. Glenn Petri.
Glenn, you want to use this or you want a lavalier? Okay. Everybody say hi, Glenn. Huh?
Which button to hit to advance? Right here to the right. And you can go back.
Oh, okay. Well, good morning. What a great crowd. This is probably beat everybody's expectations, and hopefully you'll learn something from every instructor and from the networking that you'll do today. Basically, what I'm going to cover today is for some of you that are well on your DXing journey, you may already know, I try to always throw in some factoids to make it a learning experience no matter where you're at in the amateur radio hobby and how far along you are with your DXCC quest. So we're just basically going to do an overview of DXing, and the ARRL DXCC program. So DX and DXing, where in the world will I go today? Basically, a little bit about me is I'm a retired police officer. I spent about almost 38 years as a first responder, first as a paramedic, then as a police officer with the Louisville Police Department. I did major case for a lot of those years, crimes against children, sex crimes units, domestic violence unit, and polygraph unit before the city was absolutely destroyed with a city-county merger. I retired for the first time in 2005 after the city-county merger, and I was out of it for a few years, and then I got continually asked to be a deputy sheriff with the sheriff's office up there, and I did that and retired in 2020. After 37 and a half years, I can tell you that was enough. Been in amateur radio since 1975. October is my 50th month of for my 50th anniversary for being in ham radio. I started out as a preteen under the old novice program. I got active in DXing with Cycle 21 and Cycle 22 in the late 70s and again in the 80s and early 90s, and really got hooked on DXing. One of the things that I also have started to get very involved in is contesting. And so a lot of the affiliations that you'll see up there are with the contest organizations, and actually getting to a point where I'm starting to put a few plaques on the wall with CW sweepstakes in November for CW with the Great Lakes Division. So I'm very proud of that. That's where the magic happens for me at home. I finally got a station that's halfway decent. I wish I had more antennas, but the Y factor and peace at home, I'd like to have 4 or 5 towers, but one appears to be all I'm going to get. So I run a little bit of Elecraft equipment, some Kenwood equipment, ACOM amp, and I love my Bengali keys. Is there anything missing there that you see in that picture? Microphone. I don't do much sideband except for contesting. Or if it's a needed entity, I'll maybe pull it out of the drawer. But most of my stuff is with the with CW. I had the distinct pleasure of being on the TX5S Clipperton DXpedition last January. It was an absolutely wonderful trip. Trip of a lifetime. Made a lot of good friends, and it was just an awesome experience. My first DXpedition was to Campbell Island. Well, let me go back real quick. Clipperton had not been activated for about 11 to 12 years when we got there, and that's going to be important for what I'm going to talk about a little bit later. My first DXpedition was in 2012 to Campbell Island to ZL9HR, a number 13 most wanted entity. And so my first DXpedition, I was automatically going to one that was in the top 20. What an amazing adventure that was as well. And then the Perseverance DXpedition group was formed in 2013, and the first DXpedition with that group was VK9MT to Mellish Reef. And Ralph was our pilot for that one, Ralph W4HK. And so there were a couple other opportunities that I had to go on de-expeditions, but to be perfectly honest, time and money, these things are very expensive, and we're going to talk about that as well. And so I did some back office duties and chief pilot for TX3X, VP6D, Ducey, VP8PJ, South Orkney. What we're going to cover this session: what is DX and DXing, the types of DX that you will find on the air as you tune the HF bands, and basically what is the DXCC Awards program, a brief history and overview. We're going to look at the entities list and talk about that a little bit, because that's probably one of the most interesting and frustrating aspects at the same time about the DXCC program. And we're going to talk about the awards that you can get for working this DX. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the DX Code of Conduct. So what is DX? Well, it refers to distance, and that's an old term, even from the shortwave days of back with spark gap. In amateur radio, we pretty much consider it contacts between different countries or political entities, other continents, uninhabited and remote entities about the globe. These contacts are made not by VoIP through some kind of line or satellite. It's by radio signals RF from point A to point B. The word entity that is up there, I'm gonna hammer this kind of hard, because in DXCC we're just not working countries. We're working places on the globe. So we're gonna use the word entity, and we're gonna use the word country. The word country is going to be used very loosely, but the word entity is what I want to hammer home to you about how these things are applied to the DXCC list. So have a radio and a piece of wire, the right band, the right time of day, and you can work the world. So a couple of important dates that I thought would be kind of fun to throw in here. In 1844, Samuel Morse dispatched the first telegraph message over an experimental line from DC to Baltimore, about 38 miles. That's nothing today, right? But back then, that was a pretty significant achievement. In 1874, building on the Morse code, Emile Baudot created what a mechanized scheme of sending the different letters and numbers of the alphabet in a mechanical fashion, and created the Baudot printing telegraph, which is actually a precursor to our now modern day RTTY. So what was interesting about this, and you can really go down some rabbit holes, is there was actually ways that they could send multiple messages at one time with this printing telegraph. So it's kind of interesting how quick the technology advanced. This is a question: what's the first documented intercontinental radio transmission, or transatlantic, if you want to put it that way? What year do you think it occurred? What? Actually, it was in 1901 from England to Newfoundland. Marconi, who was already running a small business, I believe probably for the maritime industry more than anything else, was actually starting to push the envelope on distance. And so the distance was a mere 2,000 miles, not much as far as communications goes in today's standards. And it was used, they were using spark gap transmitters and receivers to receive spark gap. Now, I'm not a very technical person when it comes to electronics, but I understand that with spark gap, I always thought that you made this ruckus and it just excited the atmosphere, and people could, but you could actually use coils and tune these things to a frequency and do it that way. So spark gap, even though it was very rudimentary, they actually started to learn how to tame it when they excited the atmosphere with that spark, in order to be able to control it somewhat, to be able to have it across certain parts of the spectrum where they wanted it and not where they didn't want it. Well, the other thing that I saw was, I always remembered this, was a British amateur radio operator actually copied the Titanic SOS distress signal some 3,000 miles away where he lived in South Wales. The interesting, and I got the BBC address there for you. It's kind of an interesting read. He's at home and he copies this. And of course, this is Spark Gap. And he immediately gets on his bike and he goes down to the police station and he says, "Hey, the Titanic is sinking. Get out of here, you loon." They thought he was nuts. Well, come to find out, as they backtracked all the information, he was telling the truth. How do you think they know that he was telling the truth pretty quickly? Well, the boat did sink, that's true. Well, he copied SOS. And the previous distress signal for boats was CQD. And so this was not a well-known fact unless you were in the industry. So people started thinking, well, what did you copy? SOS. So this was one of the first times in the industry that SOS was actually used. And so that helped to lend to his credibility. And plus, when they started talking to him, it was about the times and all that kind of stuff. So pretty interesting little fact there. 1912. Another interesting date, in 1906, DeForest started experimenting with the evolution of the vacuum tube for receivers. Because of all of the amateurs that were using spark gaps all up and down, primarily the East Coast, we were starting to get into a problem of interference with business and particularly the maritime industry. And so for the first time in the U.S., the Radio Act of 1912, where they started separating out spectrum, they started issuing licenses for radio stations, and coincidentally, this occurred with the London Radio Telegraph Convention at the same time over in the UK. A very important date for us is 1914 to 1917, continuing on the work of DeForest with the vacuum tube. The first successful tube transmitters were beginning to hit the market. Of course, AT&T bought the patents, and our wallets were never the same again. The commercial technology filtered down to the amateur community, very hungry for this kind of stuff, and so amateur radio began to surge again. The radio technology, atmospheric science, propagation, electronics, antenna design. So amateur radio, even from the spark gap days, began to increase greatly again. Well, of course, in 1914 is when our very beloved league, the American Radio Relay, was founded by Hiram Percy Maxim and Clarence Tuska. Now, we never remember the second guy. Does anybody know what he did? Well, he was very instrumental in receiver technology back in the day, and actually was one of the first broadcasters as far as commercial broadcasting goes for like the AM stations and so forth. So he probably did not stay in the amateur world enough to make a name for himself other than helping to create this, but he did a lot of things when it came to receiver technology and for the broadcast industry. So that brings us to here what we're here to talk about, the DXEC award program. The interesting thing on this is that it was created by a person who was an officer of the ARRL. His name was Clinton B. DeSoto. And so by 1930, because we were able to contact across continents and we were amateurs, were working different countries and everything, they were starting to clamor for an awards program for working countries. Well, in 1932, the first attempt to try to come up with a country list fell flat. It just didn't quite work out. In 1933, there was already a Worked All Continents award, and they tried to marry the two together. Well, that didn't hold together either, because the issues with countries and geopolitical problems and issues. An example, the British Empire and the French Empire were still in existence, but they were quickly collapsing at the beginning of the 1900s. And so you had Britain that controlled a country in Africa called Rhodesia. So as a ham radio operator, if I contacted Rhodesia, did I contact the UK or did I contact Rhodesia? Because it was basically owned and operated and controlled by the British government. And so this was one of the geopolitical issues that this DXEC program had to get over that hurdle about what are we going to consider as a country or as an entity. And so basically in 1935, after about 5 or 6 years of thinking about this, DeSoto proposed a framework for the DXEC program that we have to even still today. and an article in the QST. And basically, in 1937, the DXCC program officially started. And what he stated was entities would populate the DXCC list based on discrete geographical or political data. So it was a combination of both. And so that way they weren't locked into a box of if a country owned or claimed a certain area of the world that was very far away from the mother country. A short little snippet out of his article. This piece has been started a half a dozen times in the past 5 years. It has been the subject of more cerebration, contemplation, and tabulation, and plain downright misery than one cares to recall. It is presented now in a form far from what we would like it to be, only to silence the insistent demand that has come down through the years. So what this tells me is that this was kicked around. There were people who fought over it. There were people who argued over with it. And when it was finally decided to become a program, we're not going to please everybody. There were still going to be people who were going to be unhappy with some aspect of the program, but it's the best that we can come up with. For 90 years, that's the way it's been. And one of the things that DeSoto also clarified he stated in his article was that he believed that this criteria would define excellence among the outstanding DX stations that were already present at the time. And I truly believe that DXers and contesters absolutely push the envelope and keep amateur radio at the tip top of the technical parts that we all enjoy. So the basic DXCC award, contact 100 countries off the current list. Currently there's 340 entities that are on that list. You can only claim 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10 meters for your basic DXCC. It can be any combination of those bands, any combination of modes, and you'll see that here in a minute as well. The next step in the DXCC award program is 5-band DXCC, so getting 100 on each of the 5 bands of 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10. And then there are endorsements for 160 meters, 30 meters, 17 meters, 12, 6, 2, and I don't know how far they would actually accept up into the UHF band, but you can get endorsements for those. So currently I sit at 8-band DXCC, and if you're very active on 160, you're very likely to have 9-band DXCC. And so actually 5-band DXCC is probably going to be a benchmark that probably sorts you out as being a very active DXer. And we're going to look at some issues with the program coming up that I think that's a probably real, true, and relevant statement. Of course, Honor Roll DXCC Award is after you work 331 of the 340 entities. It's a very significant chapter in your DXCC quest. It shows your commitment, your abilities, your tenacity, and your longevity. This is not something that just happens over the course of a year or 2 years. This takes many, many years to foster and develop and get all the confirmations that you need. And under the current rules, it's slowly becoming unattainable. There is a date that sticks in my head that I've heard from some of the conventions that I've been to. If you have not started your DXCC quest by 2008, and if somebody else has a better date, throw it out. But I believe that I heard that it was 2008. It's statistically impossible to hit honor roll the way the rules are currently written. And so what a lot of people are going to wish to do is to reinvigorate the program and maybe change the rules a little bit as it comes to the entities, not deleting entities, but maybe doing something with some entities that aren't on very often or have not been on for decades, so that we can raise the threshold or lower the threshold so that people can still have a goal to look forward to as far as working and getting on the Honor Roll DXCC award. So this is the top dogs right here. Carl, you would probably be the only one I think in this room that would be. Are you number one? Okay, DXCC number 1 honor roll achieved after working and confirming all 340 on the current list. It is truly a lifetime achievement. because it takes decades to do this. It showcases your commitment, your abilities, your tenacity, and your longevity at this search. And under the current rules, it is quickly becoming unattainable. And the sideline to that is that if you ever go to a DXCC convention, usually they have people stand up if you have DXCC, everybody stand up if you have DXCC, or if you don't have if you have under 300, sit down. If you have 325 or under, sit down. If you're not over 330, sit down. And eventually the person that's left standing is the oldest guy in the room, because he's been DXing since 50s, the 60s. He's been doing it for probably 60 years or so. And so it's very difficult in today's world with the way entities are able to be activated to be able to reach this. I am sitting at 331. I am on the honor roll. I will probably never see number one honor roll in my lifetime. And I've been doing this for a long time. And it's just a fact that I'm going to have to accept, because the entities just aren't going to be activated. There are other awards associated with the DXCC program. The DXCC Challenge Award, and that's over one's DXing career. So the way I think it works, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, is that if I work Germany on 40 sideband, that's a point. If I work Germany on 40 CW, that's another point. So that's 2 points. And so if you work them on all the modes, all the way through all the bands, you start accumulating points really quickly. And so basically, I would guess that if you are a DXer and you have 2,000 points in the Challenge Award, you're pretty active. You're pretty active. That means you're doing, anytime DX is on, you're working it for a band fill, even though you don't need it as an all-time new one, but you're working it as a band fill, and you're earning those points. If you're somewhere up above 2,500 to 3,000, you've been doing this for an extremely long period of time. Not only are you doing it on 160 through 10, but you're also got one heck of a station that can probably do 6 meters as well. And so I'm sitting right now at around 1,800 and something on the challenge. And the reason is because I don't get down and work everything that I need as far as band fills when I should. I need to start doing that, but that's something I just need to concentrate on. And I'd like to get over 2,000 here in another couple of years. The DeSoto Cup is based on that same point system, but it's a calendar year, January 1 through December 31. And you actually get a nice trophy if you work the most DX and earn the most points and all that kind of stuff. Is that pretty much the way everybody understands the challenge to work? I couldn't find a whole lot about it. And if you're interested in it, you can certainly look it up and get it more. DXCC can be achieved by mixed mode, so any combination of CW, sideband, and digital modes, or it could be CW only, sideband only, or digital only. And that includes all of our favorite digital modes of RTTY, FT, whatever your favorite number is, JT65, and whatever. And so basically, most people, what they do is they get their mixed mode DXCC, and then what they'll do is they'll either go back and get an endorsement for CW, sideband, or digital, or they'll go ahead and pay for the extra piece of paper to say you have DXCC with CW. So I got mixed, and then I got another plaque on the wall, or not a plaque, but a certificate on the wall for CW. That's included in your handout, just some web addresses so that you can look up some of that stuff. The DXCC country list. There are 5 parts to the criteria to become a country or an entity on the list. The first one is a political entity. Well, that makes sense. A geographical entity. Land separated from its parents by its parent, or from its parent. Let me say that right. Land separation from parent at least by 100 kilometers. Or an island that's separated from its parent country by at least 350 kilometers. Example. Alaska is pretty close to 900 to 1,000 kilometers away from mainland U.S., if I remember what I looked up. So it's still a state, but because it's so far from the United States, it's so far from its parent, Alaska is its own DXCC entity as well. Hawaii, which is several thousand kilometers away from the U.S. coastline, is also a state. It's part of the United States, but because it's so far from its parent, the U.S., it is also counted as its own DXCC entity. So geographical entities aren't so political, geographical, and then there's special areas. Now, special areas get into a little bit of, this is what the league wanted to do. And so what we're looking at is like the Spratly Islands. Well, the problem with the Spratly Islands is where it sits. It's in near the South China Sea, or in the South China Sea. There's so many different countries that claim parts of it. Vietnam, South China, South Vietnam, China, or Vietnam, China, and Malaysia. And so all these people claim parts of Spratly. So what they've decided is that all of these people have legitimate claims to certain parts of that entity. So what we're going to do is no matter who activates it or what the prefix would be, whether it's a 9M6 or an XV with or a 3 whiskey with Vietnam, we're going to let that count. And so because it's in contention, we've allowed that to be a special area under the DXCC rules. Another one, and the problem with geopolitical issues is they change daily, is Western Sahara in Africa, constantly in a civil war. And so that's another location that that they allowed to be in as a special area because they're in a dispute with Morocco, and the UN has peacekeeping forces there. So because of the war, the geopolitical issues, we're going to consider that a special area. Another one is the Antarctic Treaty. Anything 60 degrees and below down around Antarctica, no real country owns anything particularly. And so there is a treaty that says if you, so going down to that particular area, and let me see if I can read it here. So it has to do with territorial claims and no new claims, and only those claims that are currently in force will be looked at. So Antarctica is a special area. The Sovereign Military Order of Malta. How many of y'all ever heard of that? Okay. It's a semi-rare to rare DXCC entity, but they have no land. It's just that they have a charter from the UN. They've been with the UN for, I think, for about 30 or 40 years. It acts like a country. It has delegations like a country, and but it's considered sovereign under international law. And so it was basically now it's a modern day humanitarian program. And so the Sovereign Military Order of Malta would be one of those things. They don't have a physical country, but yet because of the ties that they have with UN and other things, that was considered a special area. Ineligible areas. So this one's pretty easy. The DMZ between North and South Korea. That's an ineligible area. It just can't be designated a DXCC entity on its own. Let's say by chance over in the Ukraine war that there's a certain part of land that's carved out by the UN and they say this belongs to nobody, it's a buffer zone. That's not going to be created, not going to be allowed to be its own DXCC entity. Places that hold embassies are not considered eligible for a DXCC entity. Places like Mesa Verde in Colorado, where the Anasazi Indians had the cliff-dwelling Indians. So any place that would be like a demilitarized zone, neutral zone, buffer zone, any indigenous area, any monument, reservation, or particular homeland. So these rules get pretty deep on that. So it's pretty easy to understand that with all the countries in the world, you just wouldn't say, well, the embassy to Israel that's in the U.S., that would be an entity. It doesn't make any sense. So that would be ineligible to be created as a DXCC entity. Deletion criteria. If something changes that puts you, if what got you put on the list drastically changes, you can be taken off the list as far as a DXCC entity. The easiest ones to talk about are Kingman Reef, KH5K would be was the designation for it. The Navy controlled it for decades. Well, the Navy relinquished control of it, and what happened is that the United States Park Service took it over. And so because it was so close to Jarvis Island, what they decided to do was combine the two entities together, because what put Kingman Reef on the DXCC list was the fact that it was controlled, and the controlling entity was the U.S. Navy. Once it went to the National Park Service, it was so close to Jarvis, the two were able to combine. So that's one. And then there was one in 1976, 7J1, Okino Torishima. The Japanese had this little place out in the middle of the ocean within their purview that they had built a concrete platform that was covered in high tide. Well, the JARL, which is similar to the ARRL, wanted a Japanese de-expedition, so they thought this would be a cool place to do it. So they went out and they set up scaffolding and on this concrete structure that was almost swept with water even at low tide, but definitely at high tide. And it caused such a stink because it wasn't an island. Basically, the only way they were able to work is they built this scaffolding, and they were up on the second or third level of this scaffolding to escape the ocean. And so the de-expedition was over, and the clamor about, hey, this doesn't meet the rules, this is not what the rules were intended for, the operation was allowed to get credit, but after that, they said, nope, it's no longer on the list. The DXCC country list is the most controversial aspect of the rules. What qualifies, what doesn't. 90 years ago, it was the most difficult aspect of creating the DXCC program. And guess what? Even today, people still argue about what should be on this list. And there is constant consternation about, should this entity be there? Should this entity be taken off? And so it causes not a lot of barroom fights, but at Visalia, if enough people got drunk, there'd be some yelling, trust me. And so the DXCC country list, in 1939, there were 248 entities on the list. Following World War II, 1947 is significant because that's when amateur radio was allowed back in the United States again following WW2. There were 257 approximately on the list, and currently we have 340. Now, there are so many rabbit holes we could go on our DXCC list, but just look at your DXCC list in your packet for just a minute, and I'm going to go over just a few things so that you can say, instead of looking at this, go, what does this mean? So, under the current DXCC entity list, let's just look at 3 Baker 8, Mauritius. 3 Baker 8, Mauritius. Well, what the DXCC entity list is going to tell us is that it's a continent of Africa. Its ITU zone is 53. Its CQ zone is 39. And the entity code is just a coding, a computer program coding number for logging programs and stuff like that. So its designation is 165. And so there's no extra numbers or asterisks or anything next to that. Now, if you look down at 3 Delta 2, it's got the asterisk. Well, that indicates that that QSL cards could be forwarded through the Bureau. That's what that means. Now let's go down to 4 Oscar, Montenegro. Now it's got a number 47. So what you do is you look over in your over in your sheet to the sub part, and you're going to look for number 47 under the notes. And Montenegro, only contacts made after June 28, 2006 and after count for this entity. So what this does is this kind of gives you a guide about when these countries were allowed on the list and when they counted. There is also a corresponding deleted list. Now, it doesn't necessarily give you the reasons for the deletion, but it'll say only contacts made prior to this date, or only contacts between this date range. And so there are so many rabbit holes. Like I said, you could go down on this list and looking at different stuff, but once you look at it and kind of understand what the notations mean next to the prefix, then you know where to look. Look at the notes at the very end of the list, and it'll tell you about the contacts either before or after are the only ones that count for that country. And of course, the DXCC deleted entities list has basically the same thing. And there are there's 60 some odd deleted entities, and I'll give you one. There was one with the prefix of FF, French West Africa. Again, the French Empire contracted. They lost control of the country. They turned it back over to the indigenous people, and so basically it was deleted off the list because it became an independent nation. And so once you start looking at this, look at your geography, let Google be your friend, and look at the history of the country, like Zimbabwe, okay? And see that it was released from British control in 1960s, 1970s. And so even since then, there's been areas of that country that's been carved up. And so there's 2 other entities that are there as well. Currently, there's only 340 on our list. Now, does anybody have any questions up to this point in time? Hopefully this list stuff doesn't confuse you. It's just too much to go into right now. But yes. Explain Germany. Well, there was East Germany. What? Yeah, so Germany would be one of those things you'd have to dig in on the list, and you would see that Germany was its own entity, and then it was on the deleted list, and then what happened was East Germany was created, and then after the fall of the wall, then that was deleted off the list because then the 2 became one again. So not here to give a history lesson, but that's something that you could look at. Just look at look at the country of Germany, look at the history, look at how it was divided following World War II, look at the entity list, and you can kind of put the dates together. So like I said, there's just so many rabbit holes you can actually go down and start having history lessons and so forth, and that's not what we're here to do. So you know where to find the country list. You know where to find the deleted list. Look at the annotations next to the prefix, and if there's something interesting about that, it'll be in parentheses, and then you can look it up. But then again, also look at the history of the country and let YouTube be your friend. I mean, not YouTube, Google, and look at the history of the country, and you can kind of decipher, okay, this is what happened because the history of the country and who controlled it and so forth. Who makes all these rules? Well, the DX Advisory Committee, which reports to the ARRL Board of Directors via the Program and Services Committee, is the one who helps set up the rules for and maintain the rules for the DXCC program. Much like the contest, the people they respond to the Program and Services Committee as well when it comes to rules for ARRL contest. They propose changes to the DXCC country list and propose any rule changes governing the program. Of course, the board of directors are the ultimate people that make the decision. They can clarify if there's a major question that comes up or what qualifies as a valid contact or entity. So if there's a red flag flown or thrown on a particular operation, it can go in front of the DX advisory committee and they can put their heads together and they can say, this was not a lawful operation. They didn't have permission. They did something that did not correspond to the rules. And so they're the stopgap and the arbiter for that kind of thing. The other thing is that the DX advisory committee is supposed to be open to all the hams who are interested in DXing. And so there are representatives for each division, and our division director, or our division DXAC rep is there at the bottom of that slide, AC8W. But historically, the rules have been looked at by the DX Advisory Committee about every 20 years. The last time was in 2012, and this year into next year, they're really earnestly starting to look at the rules to see if they need any adjustments, because we talked about that thing about honor roll and number one honor roll are becoming too far out of reach to too many people. Want to keep the program viable and interesting. Some of these changes that happen can come out of the DXAC and the board of directors pretty quickly if a particular country decides that they want to give up control of that entity and let it go independent. And that's happened even in our sphere down in the Caribbean with was it PJ, Curacao, and some of those countries, Bonaire, some of those I think. Were given independence, and so they became their own government. And much like our Constitution, the core tenets of the DXCC program remain even today. So it was a very well-written document, and it keeps the program viable. And so, all right. We're going to have some fun with this one. The DXCC rules protect the integrity of the DXCC program, mechanisms to review proper licensing and authenticating documents, special permissions for entry and landing permits, any document in support of an operation. Sometimes it'll do audits, and it looks at fair play and ethical behavior. A walk down memory lane, much before my time, much before many of your all's time too, probably before you were even in ham radio. Don Miller, W9WNV, prolific CW operator, was a DXpeditioner in the 60s and 70s. He may have done some in the 50s, I'm not sure. Well, the problem is that Don is accused, I'm not accusing, but was accused of having shortcuts, of saying he was at a location when people begin to believe that he wasn't. And so it was kind of interesting when you read about this, that a lot of times you would see pictures that were of locations, but he was never in them, according to the people that I've read the articles about. And so people started calling into question about, was he really where he said he was? Well, there was a lawsuit, and I got it on my notes. I don't have it here. I believe it was in the early 70s. It was late 60s. There was a lawsuit between the league and Don Miller, because basically he was accused of not being at the locations that he said he was operating from. St. Peter and St. Paul Rocks being one of them. There were a couple of others. And so because people were starting to raise issue with, were you really there, he wanted to file a lawsuit because he thought he was defamed. So one of the quotes by somebody who was actually sued was Don Miller. And this is Don Miller saying this, according to the transaction that I have. I was there, John, and I operated there. This is from Maria Teresa Island, and I'm going to tell you about that. As we approached the reef, it came up out of the ocean, and we landed and we operated. And after we had finished and we were leaving, We looked back and saw the island sinking back into the sea. And that positively was the way it happened, absolutely. So what he did was, with this particular place, Maria Teresa Island, that was the straw that broke the camel's back, it was on charts, in oceanic charts for over 150 years. Even at the time that he said he went there were some charts that still showed it, but it said location doubtful on some charts, and other charts it didn't say that. So he went to a location that, after people forensically started looking about where he said it was at in the ocean, it was in one of the deepest parts of the ocean that we have in the Pacific. And so another straw that broke the camel's back was, it is said that he was at St. Peter and St. Paul rocks off the coast of Brazil. The pictures that show him in front of rocks, geologists and rock people say those aren't the kind of rocks that's out there in that part of the ocean. So there was a case that was built. And so what happened was the league and Don Miller finally came to an agreement after his partner pretty much said, you all are right, we weren't there. We were in a boat, we were off the coast, we were nowhere near it. We were close, but nowhere near it. And so the house of cards came tumbling down. And so he lost his favor. I don't know if he was kicked out of the DXCC program. I don't know exactly what happened to him. But basically, a lot of the stuff that he said that he operated, particularly like this Maria Teresa Island, just didn't count. But his story didn't end. In the 80s, he was put in prison for attempted murder of his ex-wife, or soon-to-be ex-wife. So the guy has apparently had some character issues that seem to carry throughout his whole life. But anyway, interesting story. And there's a lot of stories on the internet about him and the people that actually had conversations with him and saw him at Fresno, at the DX clubs out on the West Coast, and so forth. So that's why the DXCC rules are there. Yes. Oh, okay. So that's why the DXCC rules are there, is to keep everything in line. So how do we get the DXCC credits? LOTW is your easiest one. Submit QSL cards. I was just up in Naperville for the W9 DXCC. The QSL Bureau system is collapsing. It's collapsing so fast that in 5 years it probably won't exist. So if you think that you're going to get cards from the Bureau anymore, a lot of the countries won't accept them. The other thing is by ARRL field check representatives. They're usually at Hamfest. They're at Dayton. They're at some of the league-sponsored events. You'll have a card checker that's there. But obviously, LOTW is probably one of the easiest ways to get your submissions. The types of DX you may encounter: common DX, just people in Germany, Italy, New Zealand, Russia, Norway. The people you hear on the air just about every day are from countries every day. Common garden variety DX. Semi-rare. So these locations may not have hams at all, or they're very inactive. The locations are visited frequently because there's either a fixed wing once a week, every 2 weeks, or a ferry that gets there. Activated enough where the demand is considered low. Examples are like Togo, North Cook Island, South Cook Island, Vatican City, Palau, the ITU stations in North America and in Europe, Easter Island, many of the Western African countries. Generally entities between 50 to 100. And those numbers are not etched in stone. They're just a marker for us to consider. DXCC during contest. There's a lot of contests that are international in nature. You can get your needed DX, your ITU zones, your CQ zones, your continents. And if you do an earnest effort on one of those contests, whether it's sideband or digital, you can get 50 countries in one weekend, easy. The rarest of DX, usually found in the top 50 of the Club Log Most Wanted list, and you got a printout of what the Club Log Most Wanted looks like. 25 entities of the top 50 are not currently able to be activated. Out of those 25, 23 are islands. They're activated only about every 5 to 15 years, sometimes much longer. Hostile governments, oppressive regimes keep amateur radio out of those borders or out of those places. Sometimes they're rare because it's an uninhabited location. Most of those we find in the vast southern ocean. Many are nature preserves or protected areas. Controlling agencies are not willing to let amateur radio operators on there because they don't feel it's part of their management goal. And I'm going to speed this up here real quick. Why are the entities so rare? Because it costs so much to get there. That boat there is called the Marion de France, and you don't rent that with a $1,500 check, I can tell you. And it's got to be an approved vessel. The shipping, the people that are going to Bouvet next January and February just now shipped their crate. I don't know if you saw that on the internet. So the shipping is expensive. It is astronomically expensive. That tent right there for the shelter for extreme cold and wind, what we're looking at is a $7,000 or $8,000 tent. You probably need a minimum of 3. So it starts to add up, and if you need a helicopter to get on Bouvet or Peter 1, you've added a couple $100,000 to your price tag. 1 to 2 years in planning, significant upfront payments, $200,000 to $500,000 or more at the signing of the initial contracts, cost and entry fees. Environmental requirements. When you go to a lot of these locations, there is no yellow snow. Everything is carted back off that island and taken to the boat. And so that adds a cost. And you're gone 5 to 8 weeks or more. So here's your assignment. Go home, tell your significant other, I want to go on a de-expedition. I'm going to be gone 5 to 8 weeks, and it's going to cost me about $25,000. Anybody want to take that bet? Often associated with de-expeditions, rare DX. Sometimes it's only days or weeks that they're on the air, and then it's 2 or 3 decades before they're on again. Large pile-ups. Bill is going to talk about how we get through the pile-up. Examples are North Korea, Turkmenistan, Scarborough Reef, Curry Island, Peter One Island, Bouvet Island. This is important. It's rare if you don't have it. I don't care where it's at on the list. If you ain't got it, you're going to want to get it. I really didn't get to cover the code of conduct. It's in there. It's pretty self-explanatory. And do you think the code of conduct helped the DX pile-ups any? That's what a pile-up looks like. The match ball for rugby is the DX station. These are all the big guns that are trying to get to them the first week. The QRPers are standing in the background, okay? And so I've been doing a lot of reading from the West Coast DX Bulletin that was between the late 60s until about 1979. DX pile-ups are dirty, they're nasty, it's organized chaos. It's a symphony if it's going just right, but if it isn't, it can be a bear. And Bill is going to give you pointers on how to break that pile up, but this is what it is. It's competition. It's NASCAR. It's scraping paint and bumping. And I'll go ahead and stop there, and maybe we can talk about this a little bit later. Anybody have any questions at all? I tried to make it interesting for you. And if you're new to this, I hope you learned something. I hope there were some tidbits if you aren't new. Yes, sir.
Why do they limit it to just the 5 bands, 10 through 80, excluding 12, 17?
That's for the basic award. So that's just the rules. And so if you want to get the basic award first and then go for the endorsements, I think I know what you're saying. Why not make any of the work bands involved in there too? I don't know. I think it has to do with tradition, and I just think it's the fact that it's a rule. And other than that, Bill, you may have a.
They just announced a new 10-band award, so you'll be able to include the work bands in your DXCC award. It's a brand new plaque. It's all LOT.
So it's in addition to so it's a 10 band.
Yes.
But still, you're going to have for the basic award is going to have to be 80, 40, 15, 20, and 10. So I get what you're saying. Why not just make it any of the five? It's just the rules. And I think one of the reasons is it's a work band, and we want to try to keep the work bands what they were intended for, even though they're great DXing bands. Let's try to keep it as clear as possible, and that's maybe one reason to do that, in my mind. Maybe. Anybody else? Right over here in the corner.
Hello, test.
So you said that a lot of the DXCC rules limit the ability to get the honor roll. What kind of rules exactly are those? I understand like countries not wanting to allow entry into certain areas, but what would be some DXCC rules that are specifically limiting it?
Well, it's just that the way the rules are written is that in order to get to honor roll, you got to have 331. Well, we've said automatically that 25 out of the top 50, we don't see any chance of those being activated. So you're, instead of 9 away, you're automatically 25 away. So you may be sitting at 325, 326, and you're thinking, I look at the most wanted list and all the ones that aren't going to be activated probably while I'm alive or in the foreseeable future at all aren't going to be activated. So I think there has been some push and shove to maybe come up with an inactivated entity list to say if an entity has not been on the air in, let's just throw a number out, 15 years, 20 years, it's put on the inactive list, which then makes you one more closer. Will you do that with the next entity that meets that criteria? Makes you 2 more closer. And so what it does is it still makes it something that you can strive for. Whether or not the league will actually do this, there are some written proposals that I have seen that looked at this inactive list, because we don't want to delete it because they're still there. Just remember, back in the 50s and 60s and maybe in the 70s, China was a country that was not worked. You can work at any contest now, and it's common. And Albania was another one. Albania is on every contest. And so we don't want to delete it, but what we want to do is we want to make the DXing program viable to the point where people can say, hey, I can still reach honor roll based on the rules. And the way they're written now, it's getting very difficult. Did that kind of answer? Okay, all right. Oh, okay, any other question? There's a question in the back. Oh, okay. Yeah.
I tend to follow the DX stuff fairly well, and I remember when the work bands came out, there were limitations, some of them about contesting, because there was a great deal of international concern about overuse and interference, and it had to wait till the international system cleared up before we could do anything other than use it for casual contacts. Kind of a, hey, if you interfere here, we'll take them back away from you.
Well, DXing is not contesting, and it's and the contests are never on the work bands, but you will see DXing on the work bands, and that has not been an issue or a problem that I know of officially that's ever been argued about. But I agree with you, contest was one of the initial agreements about the work bands to not, contests would not be on the work bands, but 17 meters is an excellent DXing band. 30 meters CW and digital is an excellent DXing band. I'm here to tell you. And so thankfully we're able to DX on those 2 bands.
Any other questions? I have one. So you put the slide up of that pile up, and you said Bill back here is going to talk more about it. Can we just hire him to do it for us?
Oh, you mean hire him to work them for you?
Yeah, just work the pilot for
Well,
us.
that would be like hiring somebody, a Sherpa, to climb Mount Everest, and then you're
Yeah,
getting credit for it.
yeah.
I
That's,
don't
that's
think
why
that
I'm
would be-
asking.
No, I
Yeah.
don't think so. I don't think so.
That's the point. Yeah. Okay. Just a quick thing here. This microphone is super directional, and I apologize about that. But you can see how I have to eat it to talk into it. So if you want to ask a question, you just got to put it right. You know, you got to shove it right down your mouth there. So, okay. Any other questions? Got one up front here.
On the
What is
club
the
log,
whitelisting?
the whitelisting for club log, what that means is that the man who runs club log is a genius. He's Sheldon on steroids over in England. G7 VJR or G3 VJR, I forget what his call is. Club log is free. You are encouraged to upload your logs to club log because he is into statistics. He is into numbers. And the only way that you can get good data is have more input. The more input, the better your data looks. And so what he's looking at right there is he goes through and he looks at all the logs, and whitelisting means that he has evaluated that particular entity with his, he's done a double check on it. It's just, it's like audited. And so that shows you that that entity has been audited with the most current data. You will find some that are not whitelisted. It just, for some reason, he hasn't either gotten around to it or it's not important, but at least to him. But what that whitelisting means is that he has audited that, and with the latest data, that is the best information that he has for that particular entity. The thing about Club Log is not only does it have the most wanted, but Club Log, I could talk for 4 hours on Club Log. It is an enormous and great resource for DXing. And if you want to ask some questions about that in another session or later on today, I can give you a few hints about that. But Club Log, when you dig into it and you create an account, but it's free. You don't, no credit cards, nothing, no PayPal, no nothing. It's free. There is so much information at your fingertips because of the data that's in there. And so DXers and DXpedition leaders love it because it gives them the data that they want.
Thanks, Glenn.
All right, thank you so much.